We have had some technical difficulties. Mayor Jensen is out of town, so we are sorting through trying to get us live. So we appreciate your patience, and we are so grateful you are joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I am Kristen Boice, a licensed marriage and family therapist with Pathways to Healing Counseling, and I am so excited for our guest today, Lois Bushong. Welcome, Lois.
Thank you. I am not the mayor, so.
Yes, he's not. He's out of town, so it's you and I. And we have never talked on a topic about moving and transitions and adjusting to a new community. And I thought it would be a really important topic to talk about. And I'm so excited. I have your book right here. So I thought I would show everybody. Lois's book is Belonging Everywhere and Nowhere, Insights into Counseling the Globally Mobile. And this is an amazing book. She is a retired marriage and family therapist, international speaker, and a dear friend. So I am so excited you are here, Lois, to join us to talk about this important subject.
Thank you. It's a fun experience.
Yes.
And I really like doing it with you because you're a good friend.
That is so sweet. Thank you for being here. What we do on Mental Health Mondays, we start out every opportunity we can to deep breathe. So we're going to start off with some square breathing. And this is what I recommend to every client that comes through the door. This helps with anxiety, depression, getting your nervous system regulated. I do it every hour. And I know people are like, really? It is the most helpful tool, in my opinion, to help you come back to center and get out of fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses. So let's do it together, okay? Get comfortable in your seat, or if you're standing, feet on the floor. I like to wiggle my toes. So if you're in a meeting, you're in class, you're in a stressful situation, first thing is just kind of wiggle your toes to get back in the present moment. Pressing your feet into the floor, we're going to inhale through our nose for 4. We're going to hold the breath for 4 and slowly exhale out our mouths for 8, like we're cooling soup, cooling a cookie. So let's do it together. Pressing your feet. Okay, big inhale through your nose. Hold and slowly release out your mouth. Okay, let's do one more. Big, deep inhale. And exhale and release out your mouth. How'd that feel for you, Lois?
It's great. Now do we get to eat the cookie?
Yeah, I wish. So here we are. Let's talk about moving. You have moved over 44 times in your life. So you're really an expert on what this means to move, get adjusted, all the emotions that come with it. So tell me a little bit about how you feel, how you got into the passionate topic of, like, the passion you have for this topic.
Well, my parents were originally from Ohio, and they went as missionaries to Central America, and that's where I grew up. And so all my formative years, many years in Central America, came back to the States for college, grad school, and then I went back to Honduras myself to work as an adult for 10 years. But after 10 years, I came back to Indiana, but then ultimately I landed in Indianapolis, where I had my own practice, Quiet Streams Counseling, and it was the owner of Quiet Streams Counseling and was also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so in my practice, I worked a lot with internationals, expatriates, people that have lived and traveled and grew up in other countries like I did. So that's been my passion. And then I've also worked with people that have moved cross country from California to Indiana. My last big move, I think, was from Atlanta to Indianapolis, which was a major adjustment, just even with the traffic.
Oh, 100%. Tell us about what kind of an adjustment this is. What are the emotions that come with a move?
Well, one of the big things that comes with that is you end up with the question, where do I belong? Especially after, if you grew up like I did with many international moves, it's like, where do I belong? Am I Central American? Am I a Hoosier? I lived in Georgia. Am I from Georgia? Am I a Buckeye? Because my parents said, where do I belong? Where is home? That's a big question. Another issue is grief, because you're always leaving behind friends. Whether it's you're moving from Kokomo to Indianapolis, you're leaving behind friends, you're leaving behind things that you're leaving behind maybe a home that you really loved. Sometimes you have to leave behind pets. And then another question that you deal with is, who am I? Mm-hmm. Because we get our identity based on those individuals around us. And then if those individuals, if our support system keeps changing, well, then that becomes scrambled of who am I? Because that we don't have that stability of that same person that giving us that same message, because we're constantly moving. And then the one that always hits me the hardest, because I'm a very relational person, are the relationships. You grieve the relationships because you're constantly having to make new friends. And especially if you're in an environment like I discovered here in Noblesville, especially, people grew up together. They've known each other. They talk about, I remember when we did this, and remember that nasty teacher we had in grade 3, and so forth. And it's like we can't connect. And so we're constantly forming new relationships, and we have to do it quickly, because we learned that when are we going to move again? If you're military, you're going to move every couple of years. If you're work for the diplomatic community, move every 2 years. We came back to the States every 4 years. So you form relationships quickly, and then you have a sixth sense when somebody else is pulling away because they're getting ready to move. And so then you start to grieve. But those are some of the key challenges that we face in moving. And if it's an expatriate move, all of these feelings are amped up to another degree. Whereas if it's like when I moved from the west side of Indianapolis to Noblesville, I felt some of those things, but not to the degree as I felt when I moved from Honduras to Georgia.
Because of cultural differences too. Does that play a role?
What was
your question? Cultural differences play a role as well?
There's cultural differences. Most of the times there's language differences. There's just the way you know how to respond when you're in the States. Like, for example, when somebody sneezes, we go, whatever, we know how to respond. But in Spanish, we say salud, well, everything is different. So just the little nuances of growing up in another country, that's different. And you miss them. So when I'm feeling bad, I want food from Latin America. Forget the chicken noodle soup. Give me refried beans in a taco, or tortilla, and so forth. So everything is different.
How is it with friendships? Let's talk a little bit about trying to make new friends, because I think when you come to a new community, I think friendship building is one of the challenges you kind of mentioned. Like, people might already have a friend group. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces. People can feel lonely, depressed, afraid to put themselves out there. So how do people start building a community and relationships when they move?
Well, I think that you, first of all, have to be patient with yourself, and understand that what you're going through is very normal. And I don't know if we're going to have time to get into the cycle of transition, but everything is normal, what you're feeling. So first of all, I would say learn to laugh at yourself in forming friendships. And it's like when I play trivia games with people that don't really know me, and they ask me questions about the 60s. or the late 50s, I go, I was living in the rainforest then. I don't know. And so you just learn to live with it. But in forming friendships, everybody responds differently. Some people are very much an extrovert and it's easy for them to form friendships. Some people are like myself, whom we call tree huggers. We struggle with forming friendships. And so if you can learn to live with yourself and then constantly take the risk of reaching out to other people. And I say you can, find groups that have a common interest that you can share together. Whether you join a group such as a church, such as some type of a social group. I know that in Indy, I was talking about this the other day. I don't know if they still have it. It was a group called the High Flyers, and they were mainly for singles that just were trying to find community. So if you can find a group that you can connect with, social activities, I say walk in your neighborhood, get to know your neighbors, try to find a time to walk when most people are outside. I used to walk early in the morning and nobody was outside then, just school buses. But if now I walk about 7 o'clock at night, and it's surprising how many families and dogs are outside at that time of the night. And so you start to make friends and you start to connect as you talk to your neighbors. The main thing is just don't isolate yourself. And those of us that have made many moves, we tend to isolate ourselves because it gets tiring having your heart ripped out time after time after time in a move, leaving those that you love behind.
Yeah. So there's a lot of grief. Just like you said, there's so much grief in a move.
There's a whole lot of grief.
Yeah. And I think that's a big component we don't talk about is the grief.
Yeah.
Enough.
Well, related to the grief, I think there was a movie that came out a couple years ago. Now I've kind of see the second version of it, but Inside Out. That movie was based on the many feelings this little girl experienced in a move. And she was afraid to talk about, sad. And because when you're moving, you feel a mixture of emotions. You can be excited, you can be happy, but yet you can be sad. And that's what that movie, Inside Out, was based on, the many feelings surrounding a move. Somebody said, the deeper you love, the deeper you grieve. And that's what happens in a move. If you really, really love the people or the job that you were in before, and then you have to leave it behind, you're going to grieve a lot. If you couldn't stand them, you probably will be very happy you're moving.
That makes a lot of sense. I love that you outline this cycle of transition. Can you talk about the cycle of transition so it normalizes what someone might be feeling when they make a move or any kind of transition?
Yeah, I've run into the cycle, not just in moves, but in life. And I first heard about it from David Pollock. He is an author and he is an expert on transitions. David Pollock, Ruth Van Rieken, and Michael Pollock wrote a book called The Third Culture Kid Experience. And in that book, he fleshes out that cycle of transition. And first of all, the first step is involvement. We're in a location, we belong, we know what to do, we know what's expected of us, we have our support system, so we're involved. Then we have the second step, we're going to move. And it's the leaving. The first one was involvement, second one is leaving. That's when you get your ticket, you pack your stuff, you start to get off of committees, you start to prepare your children. If you're changing jobs, you're starting to pass on your job to the next person. So it's the part of the letting go and releasing. And so it's like, I always compare it to I'm dating myself, the old monkey bars. You couldn't move forward till you let go of the one behind you. Then you could move to the next one. So So leaving is step number 2. Step 3 is the actual transition, such as actually saying goodbye or saying hello to the new places. One of the things I always say is a good goodbye means a good hello. So if you have unfinished business from the past, you need to resolve those before you move forward. So there's the transition that if you're in other cultures, many other cultures are real big on going away parties. In Latin America, we have what we call despedidas, going away, where people come and bring you gifts that tell you goodbye, and you cry together. At least I did. And then you have the 4th step is the actual entry into the new location. And so in that step, sometimes we call it the step of chaos, because it's like you may be grieving. You may not want to be there at first. It might be very exciting. It's like, oh, great, here, they've got this. I love this. I love my new house. But then after a couple months, it's like, I really can't stand my neighbors. Or, so it's a time of chaos, a lot of feelings many times. And in this stage, everybody responds differently. So what I'm saying, some of the experiences, somebody else may not experience that. Many times in international moves, the one of the partners goes off to work and the other one is at home with the kids. And so the one that's at home with the kids struggles more because the other guy or female, the other person is off at work and has their own support system there. But the time of entry, you can go into a major depression. It just depends on how hard that transition is, how brusque. If I came from Papua New Guinea to Noblesville, that's pretty intense. And so they say that the average time in that getting new roots and getting reestablished is about 2 years. And so it's, if you're in that stage, just give yourself time, because eventually you're going to come out of it. And then you're going to hit the 6th or the 5th stage, which is re-involvement, where you now have put down new roots, a new support system. You know what's expected of you, and you're starting to feel like you belong. But then that doesn't mean that you've marked off those other people, because they will always be in your life. And part of me is still Honduran because I lived so many years there. But yeah, now part of me is from Noblesville. This is the longest I've ever lived in one place in my entire life. I've now lived here 15 years, long enough to repaint. It's like I have never had to repaint, after I painted once. And so Noblesville is where now I am putting down roots. So you go through this process, even like as I faced retirement, I went through those stages because that was a big transition. I think I'm still going through the 4th stage of chaos and entry and trying to develop new roots. So you have involvement, leaving, transition, entry, and then re-involvement. So eventually you come out the other side and you have even more skills and knowledge than you did when you were in stage 1.
That is so helpful. I think this is really helpful to people to understand the cycle and the stages and to name them. And even if you're like, let's say you have someone transitioning to college like I do, these actually fit for many types, like you said, of transitions. That's just what came up for me. I'm thinking of college transitions. And it's really helpful to kind of normalize, like, okay, the first few bits, I mean, you could be in chaos for a little while, and there's emotions that go along with that. And I think this one thing I hear people say is, I feel so different, especially if there's an international. I just feel so different, and I feel like no one gets me. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes, because we are different. That's why we feel so different. And some do better jobs at covering that up. They're called chameleons, cultural chameleons. And they cover that up. And then others, it's like they're screamers. It's like, no, I am not different. I am Central American. I will always dress like a Central American, or I will always dress like whatever. But I forgot your question.
No, it's when you feel different and you feel like,
Yeah,
no one gets me, and I feel so
right.
separate from everybody. I don't feel that sense of belonging. I feel separate. I feel different, like you don't get me.
Right. That's where it's important to hang on to those individuals that do get you, and reach out and touch them once in a while. And that's where internet is so great, because they can validate you and say, you aren't different, you aren't weird. It's just you don't know their culture. You don't know what they expect there. And it's, you have to keep reaching out and say, okay, am I weird? Because, everybody in my neighborhood went to the same high school. And they always are talking about their high school friends and doing all this stuff. Well, I went to boarding schools. They can't relate to me. I can't relate to them. And so hang on to that support system, because they're crucial. I was thinking about that even last night. Remember the movie Castaway?
Mm-hmm.
And remember, it was Tom Hanks, and how he was struggling so hard on that island all by himself. And it wasn't until he got his friend Wilson, which was a volleyball, and it was Wilson, his relationship with Wilson, that helped him get through that terrible time, there on the island. And, and then when he lost Wilson, he was crushed. And so it's like, we always say, and I have a presentation, it's called Thriving Through Transitions. And it focuses on the importance of relationships when you're going through that transition. Somebody to talk to, somebody to continue to validate. No, you are okay. These people just don't relate to you because they've never experienced that world.
That makes sense. And then shame can kind of creep in. Shame says I'm not good
Right.
enough.
Yes.
There's something wrong with me. I'm defective. That can be a big component, can it not, of making a transition?
Yes. Shame, guilt, beat yourself up. I should know this stuff. And it's like, I remember a birthday when my coworkers gave me this card, and I opened it and read it, and everybody laughed and laughed at the card. I laughed at the card. But one of my friends who knew me very well, afterwards, he says, "You didn't get it, did you?" And I says, "I have no clue what was funny about that card." And so I was feeling real shame and horrible, and it was about the Partridge Family. Well, when the Partridge Family was on TV, I wasn't even in the United States. So he helped me normalize that. It's like, hey, you're okay. You just weren't in the United States during that period.
Normalized your feelings, normalized your your experience.
Yes.
And
Right.
like that so helps to say, yeah, that makes sense that you wouldn't know because you weren't here. You were having a different experience.
It's like just the other night, I was out walking, and I was talking to one of my neighbors that I was getting to know, and we got to talking about sports because I'm a big sports fan. And so he starts going on about the Cubs, and it's like, nah. And he says, "Well, who are you for?" Because everybody here in Noblesville is for the Cubs. It's like, "I'm for the Yankees." It's like, what? Well, then I explained to him why I was for the Yankees, because that was the first professional baseball team I had ever seen. I grew up in the world of soccer, and it was the Yankees in New York City when I was like 12 years old. And so it made sense then to him why I was for the Yankees, and it made sense to me why he was for the Cubs, because he grew up in Noblesville.
Exactly. And you can both like your own teams and still connect. That's where
It's not bad. Right.
You can have your experiences and you can go, oh, that makes sense. You're a Cubs fan.
Right.
It's an
right.
and both. That's why I love this. When you understand and have that self-awareness to say, oh, this makes sense why I'm a Yankees fan, why you're a Cubs fan.
Right. And it's like, I'm a Colts fan. This is the first place I've lived where they had a professional football team. Now, when FIFA comes around, which is soccer, forget football. I'm watching the soccer games.
Yes, that makes sense. Let's talk about tips for joining a new community, being in a new community. I know you're a big, first of all, I want to say some deeper ways. You're a big journaler. I'm a big journaler. To process your experience and not suppress or repress it is one of the most important things. I encourage people, whatever's going on in your life, whether it's a transition or a move. Do you find that journaling's been incredibly helpful to process all the emotions and what's going on within you?
Well, it's helpful, but that's not, I think my better one is talking with a close friend.
Yes.
Talking with somebody that understands probably is a really key one for me. In my book, I give a whole chapter on different ways to process those feelings. Some people are artistic. I used to draw cartoons of what it felt like, because I'm not an artist, but I can do stick figures. And then music is another one. For me, it's really good. On Spotify, I have found, all those spots. This way, maybe it's why it's called Spotify. No, all those places where it has Latin American music, especially music, classical music from Honduras, because that's where I lived most of my life. And then one of the tips that's been helpful for me, that helped me the most, was humor. I grew up in a family of jokes and puns and everything, and that's how I made friends, was through my humor and joking around. Some people process it by playing sports. So we each have our style. I probably have a mixture of several of them, but yeah, it's everybody's different.
Yes, everybody has their own way that helps them. And oftentimes a therapist is going to be helpful too, because maybe it's tapping into some other deeper childhood memories or associations, or you just don't feel good about yourself. And there's some other layers to really kind of process and work through, and working on self-compassion. I think that's a process, because we have this inner critic that criticizes how we're moving or why we feel this way. We shouldn't feel this way. And I feel like that inner critic can get bigger when there's a transition.
Right. And I think sometimes we get stuck, if you get stuck and it's like, I don't want to go out, I don't want to visit anybody, I don't want to make new friends. You really need to talk to a professional. And those that have done international moves, those therapists are hard to find. And so that's why I wrote my book. That's a good lead-in, Kristen, to my book, because it's written specifically for therapists of how do you work with somebody that comes into your office that has gone through many international moves, and how to get them unstuck and maybe uncover some past trauma that took place overseas. And even though my book is written for the professional, the layperson can understand it as well.
I've recommended it. It's available on Amazon, and it's called Belonging Everywhere and Nowhere. And this book, and I love the cover, as you can see. Hey, this is how people feel. Where do I belong? We're all looking for belonging. Yeah. We'll all want to feel like we matter, we're important, we're lovable, we're enough. And a lot of times we don't feel like that. And so this helps normalize what you might be going through. So I highly recommend it on Amazon. And I'm so grateful, Lois, for you and your heart and the work you're doing in the world. Where can people find you if they're like, oh, I just want to reach out? Where would that be?
Well, I'm retired from counseling. And so I'm doing some very limited coaching for those that are making international moves, or going through a major transition. I have a website, loisbushong.com, and that's where they can find me and send me a message. Perfect. But as far as counseling, I send them to y'all.
Thank you. And there's lots of counselors out there that can help during this time. If you need immediate help, you feel like you are suicidal, or you are not sure, you feel like you're a burden, you need extra support, 988. You can call or text 988 24/7. There are trained clinicians on the other line. Please know that you are meant to be here. You matter, you're loved, and you're enough. And so please, if you need extra support, 988 is the new 911 for mental health. And I'm thrilled, beyond thrilled that it's available. So 988, if anyone needs that. And we're sending you all the love. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Adios.
Adios.